So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and as was brought to my attention by Windy Pops, this is probably going to be the video where I cross over the 2 million total views mark, which is a fairly big number for a channel like mine, so I can't help but feel quite pleased that my channel has been able to come as far as it has. And considering it is a milestone, like, again, with this sort of thing, especially considering the fact I didn't even realise it was a milestone that was coming up, actually, I didn't really have time to prepare anything particularly special, although, to be fair, this is rebuilt OSGILIATH, or at least a variant of rebuilt OSGILIATH, as best as can be managed given the current sort of spotty state of the Reforged build, considering that some of the settlements like this, particularly from the line of Numenor, broke on changing from 0.96.1 to 0.97, and they haven't been fixed yet, and to be quite frank, I haven't really seen any movement on the hotfix, so I think, to be fair, it's still quite some ways off. So this is kind of like a jury-rigged version of a rebuilt OSGILIATH, which is why the wall textures have not actually loaded in. Although it's not the worst thing in the world, mainly because I think the colour scheme of OSGILIATH and sort of the Numenorian Gondorian architecture in general is quite lightly coloured, so it's not actually as much of a problem as it could have been on, say, an orc settlement where they would have stood out like a sore thumb. As it is, it's still kind of off-putting, but it's better than nothing. And to be fair also, this should give the defenders a little bit more of a fighting chance at being victorious on rebuilt OSGILIATH, because it is a difficult map to defend when it's all crumbled and broken, especially from this side, because there's very little cover for the defenders to use, which is one of the main advantages of being on the defence, of course. So hopefully this will prove to be a worthy milestone video for the 2 million. As far as actual milestones go, I should mention this: if I'm fortunate enough that my channel does get to 5,000 subscribers, that will be when I do something a little bit more special, so to speak. But I have a few doubts over whether I actually will make it to 5,000 subscribers, to be honest with you, because I think I have plateaued with regards to my channel. I think that this is probably as far as it's going to go as far as channel's total size, at least this sort of ballpark. But that's the sort of thing that can be talked about in another environment, I think. But for now, we shall focus, as we normally do, on the actual game itself. So we'll go through the attackers first and foremost, even though one of the defenders sent this to me. This was about a month ago, this was sent to me, by the way. So we have the Mark of the Knight, who's going to be playing as a Rune on the outside over here, so the Easterlings, the Narim, once again, the slightly more damaging but slightly less tanky version of the archers, which or sort of the mid-tier archers that Rune have available to them, which again, on the attack in a siege, I still prefer the Variag mercenaries. Their shields and the ability to upgrade their armour comes in really handy just for wearing the enemy down, which can be such an important tool when you're on the attack, taking away the ability of the defenders to use their skirmishes in as potent a way as they will need to in order to try and equalise the numbers. Some Dragon's Wrath crossbows mixed in with some Scion Rim pushing up the siege towers. A Dragon's Breath flame cannon, which will be interesting to see if it's as devastating as it can be normally. To be fair, I think OSGILIATH offers enough cover to make the runic cannon a little bit more difficult to use as brutally efficiently as it can be used, but we shall see. It could prove to be something which really does swing the map in the attacker's favour if it can get into a good position, but that is a big if in an attacking siege. Flagrim, 3 units of some E-Strong crossbows with some Carmel's Chosen mixed in there, as well as some Gamprin forming up a V. It's kind of an interesting formation he's got going on here. A little self-contained square, or, well, not square, but I was going to say noob square, but it's not really a noob square. He's just setting up his army to make sure cavalry doesn't immediately mow down his entire army. We have Trebor, who, this is another name I haven't seen in a little while actually, so it's nice to see some familiar names that have been in replays in the past. He's playing as Mordor, so he's got some orc fodder. He's got a couple of units of Blackguard, which are so useful on the attack for their ability to push through, but though, as we've seen in 0.97, it's certainly not as potent a tool as it was in previous versions of the game. Now you have to be a lot more careful with it, because it has a much higher chance of failure if you push in when the defenders are still too strong and are able to withstand such a push. 2 units of Minas Morgul Chosen, so again, heavily armoured spears, which are very, very tanky. Very nice. We have some Orc Javelins, 2 units of them, so nice and cheap, but still damaging. The Bulldogs and the Temple Executioners. Temple Executioners, of course, are the superior unit of the two, but they're also more expensive. But as far as heavy swordsmen go, huge base damage, huge melee defense. They don't have their armor upgrade, but still doesn't make them all that much less effective, to be honest with you. The Bulldogs, meanwhile, are one of those bodyguard units which is a sword and shield unit, albeit they are AP. So in many ways they should have maces. But yeah, having AP is a very useful tool. And there's also where the general's going to be hanging out. Some Olakai, some Mountain Trolls just for some extra punch from those Trolls. Temple Guard with their armor piercing projectiles. And some Orc fodder as well. And some Nazgul. So more of an elite-focused Mordor army, certainly, I would say. You know, most of their high-tier offerings are here. Really, only the Sauron's Will, and a few of, and obviously their cavalry units are missing. Really, the Orc Fodder is the only lower-end unit I can see here, which is an interesting tactic to take as Mordor. We have Khan, played by Pharaoh. He's got some Variag Bowmen without the armour upgrade, but still very similar to the Variag Mercenaries that fight for Rune. Shields, you know, decent armour. Overall, they're nothing too special on paper, but in a real battle situation, how efficient they are is a very useful tool. Sort of the better version of them individually in terms of stats of the nomadic infantry, especially in melee, I have to say. But they are more expensive and there are less of them, so to be fair, I actually prefer the Variag Bowmen as a unit, but if you're going to bring both, it's a good idea, because obviously it does mean that both these units can look after themselves okay in melee, as well as offering a lot more ammunition to shoot down range. More nomadic infantry there as well. Some Variag Warriors, which are sort of cheap, heavy swordsmen, which are a bit of a rarity, to be fair. You know, as cheap as the Variag Warriors go, obviously this does mean they're nowhere near as effective as units like the Caer Andros Swordman, Ravenhelms of Caer Andros, I should say now, Dismounted Fornos Terrain Knights, or any of the Elven equivalents, of course, but you know, they're still decent in terms of their base damage and melee defense, which is all you can really ask from a unit that costs what they do. So unlike most heavy swordsmen, you can actually say they're quite efficient as long as you get them into melee without them getting shot. More Variag Warriors. Brotherhood of the Sword, quite a similar story here, albeit very focused around melee defense. The Brotherhood of the Axe, kind of the opposite. They're more focused around damage and armor piercing, whilst compromising a bit on their melee defense, albeit Brotherhood units in general are expensive enough that you know, they're obviously going to have decent stats all round. Nomadic Warriors, so just a unit of very basic line infantry. We have some Nomadic Marauders, some Storm Guard, which are probably most people's idea of Khan's most elite infantry unit, and I would agree. They may not have a phalanx anymore, but they're still brutally effective when you get them in and amongst the rest of the Khandish line. And then all the Nurads, the Nurad footmen over in the distance with their war clubs and big shields, and the Nurad halberds over here with their G halberds, which of course, armor piercing all round, phalanx, good heavier infantry units as well, very useful for Khan. We have Umbar, played by Lord Blackhole, who's got some Naru Naaru Raw Guard, so some heavier spears here. He's also got some Belagar footmen, which as far as, you know, well, Naru Naaru Raw Guard are heavier spears mixed with archers, of course, but Belagar footmen, just the basic spears, the workhorse of the Umbar army. Belagar pikemen as well. Oh, that's good tea. But we got some Belagar archers, who of course are going to be very similar to the Variag Bowmen and the nomadic infantry, although the Balaketh marksmen probably share a little bit more in common with the nomadic infantry. They are strong in that regard as well, after all. I suppose, yeah, the nomadic infantry, they are noticeably stronger to the extent that they would be counted alongside the likes of the Balaketh marksmen and the Bardian marksmen, which is high praise to give a unit which honestly doesn't get picked an awful lot, but can't just have, you know, options elsewhere that are probably more popular. But yeah. We've got some Balaketh marksmen back here as well. So a lot of archers over here for the attackers so far from Khan and Umbar, which means they should be able to weather the storm for quite a long time in this fight. Naru and Iru Sentinels, a Dunaim Shield Guard, Balaketh Shield Bearers over here as well, the heavier Maceman, Axe Guard, so plenty of armor piercing between the Axe Guard and the Maceman, and then some nice swordsmen in the shape of the Alcarondas Legion as well. Then, moving on, another Mordor army, I don't want it, playing as Mordor. So he's got some Blackguard of Barad-dûr. He does have the Sauron's Will in here, so they're nice serrated axes offering some AP. We have some Morannon infantry, going for a little bit more of a balanced approach to this Mordor army. I think more typical of what you'll see from Mordor in most situations. I think lots of Morannon to bulk out. There's Orc Archers as well. Orc Archers and fodder to be cheap, to really provide a lot more numbers, and a few elite units interspersed throughout. So I can see the Nazgûl sticking out there. You can see the Temple Executioners. You can see the Olag High. There's also Orc Javelins in here as well, but certainly not as much in the way of higher end units as the other Mordor army, but a lot more in the way of numbers, and it is the approach that I would expect Mordor to have more often than not. Mordor can go all in on their elites, and we'll see how that Mordor army does, but in this situation where you're on the attack, I do think the ability to sustain an assault with a lot of numbers is important to it for at least some factions to bring, and because Mordor can do it easier than most, it's often the role that they end up playing. MSQ2, who's going to be playing as Gondor. I believe it's him who we're watching the battle replay from the perspective of. He's got some Gondor archers over here, some Athelian rangers ready to bombard the enemies as they cross the river. Veterans of OSGILIATH ready to do the same. Lots of armour upgrades, of course, as you'd expect from defenders. Pelagia Marines, Nimlothian Honour Guard, Royal Legion of Armanelos of Numenor. Beast mode on 70, playing as Numenor. The one Numenor army alongside two Gondorians, Y2K86, playing as the other Gondor army, Vanguard of King Elisar there. Some Belagar pikemen ready to move. There's a little area in here which can be retreated to, I'd imagine, although how useful it is I'm not sure, because obviously retreating your entire force, final stand force into those walls means you're surrendering the town centre and you'll need to come straight back out again. So, I mean, it's neat, but we'll see how useful it really is. Remena Abarim and Seafarers over here, ready to accept Rune's advance. Nardukadar, 2 units of them. Balagai archers ready. We've got some Balagai footmen as well, so basic spears. Some Adunheim shadow bows up on the walls alongside some Royal Guard and some Balagai archers, so Rune. It's unfortunate for Rune they're going up against Numenor, really, because Numenor can be a scary opponent when they're on the defence, with javelins and archers as well as very elite infantry to block the way. They may lack a little bit in terms of numbers, but that's not something that's going to bother them too much, I don't think. We have some cavalry ready to leave the settlement as well. Mithrandir's retinue, 24 in number. Obviously multiple HP lancers that are very tanky indeed. They may not be very good in melee against other cavalry when you compare them to knights, but their ability to withstand punishment is not to be sneezed at. Fountain Guard and Guards of OSGILIATH, as well as some Bowabarim up on the walls, some Citadel Guard with the Guards of OSGILIATH as well, some Axemen of Lasarnak and Remena Abarim, and then the rest of the Gondorians over here in the middle, Pelagia Marines, Veterans, Marksmen, all of the good stuff, Fountain Guard, Wardens of the White Tower, more Remena Abarim and Citadel Guard. There's also some Wardens of Minas Ithil over there, you don't get to see them an awful lot, but when you have the cash to splash, as Gondor, you can certainly feel that a lot of archers of varying types, including the Marksmen and Caerandros up on the walls, more Citadel Guard, Fountain Guard, armour-piercing spears all over the place, a lot of Axemen over here as well, Raven Helms and Axemen of Lasarnak, so a lot of shock infantry. Good to see. A Trebuchet, although it's so close to the wall, it'll probably end up wasting its ammunition, or at worst, friendly firing their own men in the walls, to be honest with you. Gondor archers, Gondor spears, a lot of Gondor spears there, and more Vanguard of King Elisar as well. So I will make a little bit of a cut here, because it's highly likely, I think, that the red team will take a little bit of time just sort of manoeuvring around the place before they start moving in. And this is a long one anyway, so we need to trim the fat a little bit and make things a little bit more efficient. So I'll make a little bit of a cut here, and I'll rejoin when the battle begins. So a very quicker aggressive push than I was expecting, honestly, from Rune, and I was honestly expecting the siege equipment to be used to tear down some of these sections of walls. I mean, it's something which it is certainly very, very effective at, but maybe he does want to save some of the ammunition from them, because he's pushing up all of the siege towers here, the Mark of the Knight, and he is immediately going to start mounting the walls, albeit he is going to need the support of some of his allies, otherwise Numenor could very easily receive some support from the Gondorians, and then just one of the attacking armies here is certainly not going to be enough, to break through the ready and waiting Numenorian forces. The Nardukadar up on the walls already. Obviously armor-piercing spear is going to be very good with their high defensive values to hold the runic forces in place, and as if that wasn't enough, there are lines of Balagai archers ready to shoot, as well as a Adunheim shadow bow, so it's going to be a very grisly task for Rune to move forward. Actually, no, it looks as though they're just going to set up the siege towers on the walls and then retreat. Questionable that, because it means they're going to take losses going forward and take losses on the retreat, although to be fair, they've only taken, there's only one death that I can see. There'll be a few more now that the angle is a little bit better, but certainly I think the Balagai archers have used up quite a lot of their ammunition already here, chasing a cause which is not really all that worthwhile. They're hitting some of the runic soldiers now, but Rune will probably be very pleased that, even if it's only the basic Numenorian archers that have expended some ammunition, the fact that they have been able to put a dent in that Numenor ammunition supply, if I get my words out. But it is also worth saying that MSQ2 and Y2K86 have both sent their Mithrandir's retinues out here. Obviously quite a common tactic if you want to save your cavalry when you're the defenders for later, is to just send them to the outside of the settlement and to the edge of the map. Make it as unappealing a prospect for the attackers as possible to chase them down with any cavalry or trolls that they may have. And then obviously you can just sort of leave them until the late game, and obviously in the late game, if you've got a unit that can hammer an anvil as well as the Mithrandir's retinue, you are tilting the odds much more in your favour than they would otherwise be. Carmel's chosen meanwhile are going to retreat, but I think actually it's probably a good idea to make another cut here, because Rune are not going to move in as aggressively as I first thought, and there isn't a great deal of movement on the other side of the lake just yet, so once again we shall enter the period of a cut. Well, that was very quick and very reckless from Trebor, if I'm being honest with you, because it happened so quickly I didn't actually realise it was happening. But the trolls have come out here alone, and trolls in melee with cavalry are very good. Trolls, when they're getting charged by cavalry, are poor. They can be skewered quite easily, to be honest with you, albeit that wasn't the best of charges here, and MSQ2 maybe throwing his Mithrandir's retinue to the wolves somewhat here, because he needs to be very careful, I think. Now this is a situation that the Gondorians could absolutely use in their favour, but they don't seem to be doing a very good job at targeting the unit that's in front, and they're ending up pulling, you know, what's ending up happening here is they're pulling their cavalry through the trolls, which is the last thing they want to be happening, because that's giving the trolls the ability to not be charged, which that armour-piercing charge is what ends up skewering trolls. Like you can see there, the lances were down, and on that occasion you see there that a couple of the trolls did fall away. But if they're just wandering into the trolls, that means that it's become a fight much more about just being in melee, and that's a fight the trolls will win. The Olag Kai especially, but now the lancers are down, so this should result in a couple more kills. Yeah, a couple more it did. So again, the trolls starting to take losses, which is bad news for this Mordor army in particular, because they simply don't have the numbers, really, in their composition to be as effective as their counterpart on the other side of the river. Probably would have been better, actually, for the teams if they had switched roles here, and this army on the outside had the more numbers-focused approach, and the one on the inside had more numbers, because fighting alongside Umbar and Khan gives them a little bit more of a buffer. Being as isolated as they are out here, losing those trolls might be enough to really blunt the effectiveness of Trebor's Mordor army. Not make him useless, but certainly make him less potent than he would have wanted to be. Meanwhile, there is movement now happening in the middle. Gondor archers from MSQ2 moving forward and perhaps thinking they could get away with sitting here and shooting as they cross the river. The problem, of course, here is MSQ2 is preoccupied with trying to micro his cavalry on the outside of the settlement, and so his upgraded Gondor archers got intercepted, or closed down really, by the Balagaya footmen from Lord Blackhole. But now some fully upgraded Gondor spearmen coming in, and being as upgraded as they are, the Gondor spearmen will beat the Balagaya footmen. But having said that, these are two units which are not really designed to do their damage all that quickly, so that, you know, obviously that is going to come as no great surprise. Indeed. Nurad footmen moving across me. Nurad footmen would turn this fight around. Their armour piercing would be so useful, especially considering that MSQ2 appears to only be sending forward more upgraded spearmen, which are going to fare quite poorly against a unit like the Nurad footman. But as it is, I mean, these Gondor archers are still just sort of hanging around in melee. They should just shift themselves back a little bit, get themselves into a position to start shooting their ammunition onto the forces that are crossing the bridge as they move across, because that could make the difference. Oof. That is the unmistakable sound of the Runic Dragon's Breath cannon. It's the unmistakable sound of its ammunition being wasted, I have to say, on the cavalry. This cavalry's already taken some damage, and to be quite frank, it's not really the main it shouldn't be the main priority of the attackers for now. It may become more of an issue in the late game if they're still hanging around over here, but it's certainly not worth using a resource as valuable as Rune's artillery ammunition on. Certainly not at this stage, anyway. You can see there the trolls and the spears have also separated out from the main army of Mordor enough that the cavalry should just be able to get to the wall, skirt along the edge of the settlement, and then move directly towards the Mordor army, but we'll have to keep an eye on that as and when it happens. Rune, meanwhile, are now trying to get up onto the walls, and again, it's very interesting plays happening here. The Dragon's Wrath crossbows are the ones that are leading the way, and to be brutally honest, with how unreliable they seem to be at firing their weapons, I'd suggest this maybe isn't the worst use of them, to be honest. Using them as infantry more than anything else, they actually managed to get some shots off there, which is remarkable, really. Killing off a few Rhun and Nardukadar, like you so rarely see them fire because of line of sight issues, but I guess they're up on a tower here. They've got a clear line of sight to the Nardukadar. That one, however, was a blank fire. That's much more like the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen I know and love. Or not love, as the case may be. Rhun and Nardukadar ready to receive the charge of the Shadow Guard, but again, this seems like, again, a bit of a limp-wristed assault from Rune so far, I have to say. Meanwhile, over here you can now see that Khan moving forward their nomadic warriors again. You know, just basic line infantry, but there are Nurad footmen in here as well, so between the more numbers-focused nomadic warriors and the AP of the Nurad footmen, Gondor will probably have to start thinking about sending over some reinforcements to help their spearmen. As good as basic Gondor spears can be at holding the line when they have fully upgraded armour. While moving in, you can also see the Citadel Guard. Balance of forces evenly matched. Victory is a distinct possibility. My. Citadel Guard being committed so early, but when you're the defenders and you have so much quality at your disposal, you can afford the odd elite unit to be sent in this early, even when people are just trading blows with more basic units to start with. Morale on infantry moving forward. This is a little bit more like it from Gondor. MSQ2 did end up pulling his Gondor archers out, and now they have a decent shot into the side of the Variags and other Khandish men as they move forward. Citadel Guard going to join the fray, so a lot of spears, so a lot of shield wall action to be had, but the Citadel Guard as well temper that with having their AP and just really high stats in general to really offset that spear malice very nicely. And so these basic forces of Mordor and Khand are going to really struggle, I think, to make the impact that they so clearly want. While over here, Dragon's Wrath Crossmen still just hanging out. No damage on those siege towers yet, not really. Then still a kind of uneasy standoff between Rune and Numenor so far. Mithrandir's retinue still buzzing around out here at MSQ2. But between all the Gamper and between the Eastron crossbows, you can't really get too near the Runic army. Like any army that can pack crossbows, it's always going to be quite difficult to sort of get your cavalry in there, especially if it's just the one unit. If there's more, then you can sort of saturate their defences, as it were, and get in and amongst the crossbows before they can really do damage. But when it's just the one unit, they're so easy to zone out. They're just going to get last samurai'd on the approach if you allow that to happen. Over here, meanwhile, Y2K's Mithrandir's retinue is having substantially more luck. The Orc fodder that was sent forward to push the ram up again without support is going to be easy pickings. They may be spears, but they are, of course, one of the lowest quality spears in the game, so when they get charged by a unit of really high quality cavalry like the Mithrandir's retinue, it shouldn't come as any great surprise when the Orc fodder start to drop fairly quickly. Let's see here, and there's a lot of defences in here as well, so yeah, like Treble, just based on his composition, I think is going to have a few issues here. And over here, you can see there's some javelins being thrown in from, I believe those are the Orcs. No, it's the Nomadic Marauders actually, but they're getting picked apart very quickly here by this unit of Gondor archers. And again, basic archers like this are not going to have the most damage, but they're certainly doing a good job here as side-swiping the attackers as they cross the river. But the Gondorian line will hold the Fountain Guard here as well, so I don't necessarily disagree with javelins being pushed up, because between the Citadel Guard, but especially the Fountain Guard with their phalanx, it's very unlikely that the attackers are going to make any sort of headway here anytime soon. There are footmen piling into that front line as well. There's some Warns of Minas Ithil waiting. Marksman of Caer Andros, yeah, but so far I think the defenders will be quite comfortable with how things have gone. Rune, meanwhile, now moving forward once again. Did Rune bring a ram? They did. So why are they not trying to batter down the gates? Like, as many ways in as possible is what you want. But Rune are settling for just the 3, and moving onto the walls via Siege Tower is not a terribly efficient way to go about things, because your unit takes a lot of losses initially, as initially they're obviously surrounded and outnumbered by the first defenders, especially when you're going up against a unit like the Rhun and Nar-Dukadar. Like, their AP and their high stats, they can do damage to a lot of units. I mean, to be fair, the Shadow Guard, not necessarily the most armoured unit, but that's not exactly a good thing either, considering their lower defence values for being an AP shock unit. But I have to say that at least Rune are not just sort of sending in weak units to be slaughtered en masse by the Numenorian infantry. I mean, they're sending in units like Carmel's Chosen and Shadow Guard. They've also got some Shadow Guard fighting. I wonder if the textures haven't loaded in, it helps performance at all. Must be negligible, but I imagine it happens. Rhun and Nar-Dukadar holding the line against the Shadow Guard as they just continue to fight against one another. The Shadow Guard should actually have a bit of an edge in that fight, because again, it's not the ideal opponent for the Nar-Dukadar, and you know, they are heavily armoured, so the AP is going to have a big effect from the Shadow Guard. The Carmel's Chosen, meanwhile, are going to do a very good job here on these Belagaya footmen. Nar-Dukadar are going to come over here to try and surround the Carmel's Chosen now, but you can see here the Shadow Guard have, you know, cleared a bit of a spot on the wall. Nar-Dukadar are over there continuing to hold on. A lot of fire arrows being loosed. And to be fair, Numenor's morale will hold itself together perfectly well. So you may as well, if you think you can rout these initial vestiges of the runic advance. But I would also, well, there's also, you know, the cosmetic fire arrows from the Nar-Rim being fired back as well. So there's flames from both sides, albeit in this case the Numenorian ones are the only ones with any actual mechanical effect. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult this for Rune. Over here, meanwhile, yeah. And again, this is the sort of thing that can happen. Like, if you just send out a unit of fodder to push the ram, completely unsupported, the defenders can counter-attack through the gates and easily mop them up. And the Axemen of Lasarnak, of course. Easy work. Light work against the Orc fodder for them. As high damage as they are. Meanwhile, over here, still, yeah, like this Gondorian wall is holding on very nicely. Obviously, you know, this city wants the jewel in their kingdom. They don't want, in this particular timeline, they don't want to ever lose it or see it reduced to rubble, I suppose. Veterans of OSGILIATH and Gondor archers, so now another unit of archers has been committed. The Athelian Rangers also getting into position, which should really concern the attackers. One thing I'm actually quite surprised about so far, I mean, they're doing it now. They're sending forward their nomadic infantry, they've got some morale on archers, but I'm surprised they didn't do this sooner. One thing that Umbar and Khand in particular had at their disposal over on this side was a lot of archers that are good in a skirmish fight. And yet we're only seeing now the first committals of that. Which does surprise me. We got over here. They're going to try and get up onto this bridge over here. I think you can actually traverse this bridge, but the pathing on it is horrendous. Like, if you can get your unit all the way up and over to the other side, it's more of an accident than anything else. Which is why the attackers are not using it, because it's just not a practical thing to do on this map. Like, again, bridges in Medieval 2 are interesting, to say the least. The effects that they can have on battles, the amount of battles I've seen where bridges have been a factor due to mechanical weirdness is fairly high at this point. Orc fodder moving forward, nomadic infantry about to get engaged in melee though. This Gondorian metal wall has really just not budged an inch. It's going to take far more from the attackers if they want to try and genuinely test the Gondorian defence. I mean, to be fair, some routing happening from the more basic rank and file of the Gondorian army, but with Fountain Guard and Citadel Guard there, you're not going to rout the entirety of the army. Meanwhile, Rune continuing to push in, some Flag Rim now entering the fray up on the wall, so that's more AP. They should be a little bit better suited to survival up here on the walls with their heavier armour and their shields in comparison to the Shadow Guard. But it's still not an ideal situation for them. Obviously, fighting up on a wall can be hard and grisly work. And the Carmel's Chosen look like they've actually been dealt with, and it would not surprise me. Yeah, I mean, here they are, look. Adunheim Shadow Bows. Going to be able to do their thing. Balagai Pikemen. Moving into position as finally Rune are now going to batter down the gates and try and sort of attack from multiple angles, make it so they're not just in one area for the Numenorian skirmishers to easily shoot them like fish in a barrel. So it's good to see that Rune are now taking advantage of that, although the losses they've already taken for really no gain. I mean, they are inflicting some damage on Numenor at the very least, but I kind of doubt the attackers' abilities to actually win over on this side, which very often, when you're fighting on OSGILIATH, this side of the river is where the attackers can really make their presence felt. There's so much more room to manoeuvre, and you can really spread out your numbers and try and pull the defenders across the map, which the attackers haven't really been able to do yet. And if Rune keeps taking losses like this, with Mordor's more quality-focused army, they won't be able to do it either. Which will of course put more onus on the three that deployed on the other side of the river, which is not exactly what you want because they're far more easy to bottle up for the defenders than those that are over here. I mean, you can see here that Mordor really don't want to move further forwards. Rune do have that gate battered down now though. You can see over here, like, this is going to be the story of the engagement over here for a little while, I think. The Gondorians continuing to fight on this bridge. I mean, when you've got units like Citadel Guard and Fountain Guard, they're so good at holding the line, combined with the fact that they're also very good at dealing damage. That AP is so useful, and it'll be useful against all of the attackers here. Khand a little bit less, but certainly Mordor, and especially Umbar, that AP is going to have an impact. And they are going to carry on fighting here for some time, the Gondorians, unless, like I said, the attackers can try and affect this battle in some other way. I mean, the Moranon archers are here, nomadic infantry are also there as well. So they are trying to fire in as well, but I mean, they're skirmishing. But you can see here the Gondorians are going after the infantry, whereas the attackers are trying to kill off the archers. Looks like they just ran out of ammunition, actually, the veterans of OSGILIATH. But between all the armour upgrades and all the shields, Gondor is so difficult to wear down like this. They've got such a lot of staying power, and especially with their higher end units like the veterans of OSGILIATH. Gondor archers out of ammunition there, so they're just being thrown in. Give some backup to the Fountain Guard. Meanwhile, the Flag Rim, Fountain Guard and Citadel Guard, I should say. The Easterlings fighting against the Numenorians up on this wall. The Flag Rim Their AP, given by their maces and eastern axes, doing a good job against the Belagaya footmen, certainly. And I mean, Numenor, they are running a little bit lower on manpower up here, so the Numenorians maybe not so eager to send reinforcements up here, which may prove to be their undoing now that units like Scion Rim are making their way up here as well. The fact that Rune are also putting pressure on this side as well. I mean, the Belagaya pikemen are here, but their formation already looks like it's starting to bow a little bit. The Rhun at Abarim are fighting hard, and as far as an infantry unit goes, they are certainly of higher quality than the Flag Rim and the Scion Rim, actually. But I think Rune can sustain this for a little bit longer yet, and Numenor will need some reinforcements, I think. This is a real concern, actually, for Numenor. If they allow the Eastron crossbows to simply set up without any kind of reprisal up on this wall, the bolts will easily be able to give Rune a distinct advantage. There's a few Flag Rim over here blocking for the Eastron crossbows as they scurry their way into position over on that wall over there. It will take them a little bit while to get set up and shooting, and Numenor need to try and make something happen in the interim. Scion Rim over here as well. Nar Rim, they may have used up quite a lot of their ammo already, maybe all of it actually, so you know, their only utility now is as a bit of a makeshift meat shield in melee. Gamp Rim. Let's see here. Rhun at Abarim. Just sort of waiting over here, so it's very quiet over on this front still, but I kind of understand why from Treble's perspective. Looking at the numbers in his army, he knows what fate awaits him if he moves forward now. You know, he doesn't have the numbers to just sort of carry on through. He'll get held up on pikes and spears, and he'll get shot, and his manpower will evaporate in front of him. So I can understand why he's not, but Rune is biting the bullet and trying to make something happen, which I respect a lot more, even if it ends in failure. Meanwhile, moving forward, another unit of Moran on infantry, trudging across the bridge, stepping over the bodies of the fallen. Nomadic infantry broken and fighting to the death. Still, it doesn't look like the attackers are really making much headway at all over on this bridge, to be honest with you. The Gondorians still holding on very resolutely indeed. Blackguard of Barad-dûr, Sauron's Will, Moran on archers. A lot more coming forward now, and the Blackguard of Barad... Again, like, I think there's still a few too many Gondorians here for the Blackguard of Barad-dûr to push forward effectively. Certainly not now. They really are threading the needle there very nicely, actually, just through the columns and the supports, bisecting, you know, their two units and hitting perfectly. That's the kind of shot that the trebuchet of old never would have been able to make without its increase in accuracy, but certainly those trebuchet volleys will be able to devastate units like the Blackguard of Barad-dûr if they can hit centre mass, and then of course their ability to mass push through will be severely weakened. Meanwhile, Axemen of Lasarnak also joining in up on top of the walls. I mean, to be fair, Rune, despite the harsh hand that was dealt to them, they are the attacker which is doing the most to try and further the cause of the team as a whole. They are pushing in now, Eastron Crossmen, and I think they see now, the defenders, the threat that Rune poses. A Duneheim Shadowbow is coming in, but is it too late already? Rune are continuing to push in. Do Rune have the manpower still available to them that they can continue this assault? Because they don't have their Carmel's Chosen. Their Dragon's Wrath crossbows died on the walls as well, I think. Unless they got retreated back. It's possible they did. Yes, they did, actually. But the Carmel's Chosen certainly perished on the walls. Over here, meanwhile, Vanguard of King Elisar will push forward to help push back the Scion Rim, and push them back they did. So reinforcements from Gondor absolutely vital, but perhaps the most vital will be the Wardens of Minas Ithil. They have a very nice shot right down the biggest proportion of Easterling soldiers that are still there, and this is the problem. I mean, with Rune the only one making any real headway, the Mordor army in the south not really doing anything, and the three in the middle just sort of caught up on the defences. The defenders can afford to send more of their resources over here to stop Rune's advance. And it's unfortunate for the Runic player, but I feel as though at the very least the forces that are across the river are at least attacking. I think Treble, in spite of the fact I can understand why he's not eager at all to move in, he needs to, because otherwise he's leaving his allies out in the cold. And that's the first step on the path to losing a team battle. Pelagia Marines, out of ammunition I would assume, so they're going to get in here and try and block the crossbow fire, and they will succeed. 2 units of East Strong crossbowmen being engaged by a single unit of Pelagia Marines. If Rune are to make something happen here, they will need their crossbows to do some work. So it's very good that the Gondorian player, it's good for the defenders that the Gondorian player was able to get their Pelagia Marines into melee and stop that from happening. Let's see here. Still some Rhun wavering after being pushed through. I mean, to be fair, there's only a single unit of Rangers holding the front line, but the unit of Rangers they really need to worry about are the ones that are over here. Ones of Minister Thiel doing some damage. Rhun getting engaged by the on-rushing Royal Guard, who at this point are presumably out of ammunition, but they're tough enough in melee certainly to turn the tide as well. Another unit of Romena about him. And it's not going to get any easier for Rune. I mean, their artillery's being pushed in now. Perhaps as a bit of a last-ditch effort to try and inflict some deep damage onto the defenders that have decided to engage them over here, because I think their fate is more or less sealed. The Gondorians over here, meanwhile, still show absolutely no signs of buckling under this pressure. Gondor archers over there continuing to fire, and there's plenty more where that came from a Gondorian perspective. There's certainly a faction that can field a lot of archers, a good variety. And so far, the damage that they've been dishing out to the attackers has been enough to ensure that their front line continues to mulch these orcs and evil men as they cross the river to try and take the rest of OSGILIATH. And still, you can see here nomadic infantry trying to do their thing. Belagair archers also trying to do the same. They've been constantly trying to do damage to the Gondorian skirmishers here. But in so doing, the Gondorians have completely ignored them and have focused on the infantry fight and affected the infantry fight, and that's not something that the attacking skirmishers have been able to do. To be fair, the attacking skirmishers also don't really have the same angle that the Gondorians have to take advantage of. Gondor spearmen are back. Fountain Guard, another unit of Fountain Guard coming forward. That Gondor spearman looked like it had routed previously and is just being thrown in once again. They probably won't last too long, but another fresher unit of Fountain Guard is the last thing the attackers would have wanted to see over here. Honestly as well, like this siege tower that the attackers have pushed in is not helping their case at all. It's just making the choke point narrower, which is only going to help the defenders, so a catastrophic error from whoever did that. And it is an orange one, so yeah, it must have been Khan that did that, and it's cost them more than it's gained them to do that. Wow. Oof. That was a pretty devastating hit there on that Romena about him. So they have been able to get their artillery in position, which I'm actually surprised about. They pushed right through an area that was a very dangerous place to be. And at the very least, Rune is going down swinging here. Dragon's Wrath Crossman up on the walls. They are going to lose, ultimately, the gap for him being focused down. And that may have been their swan song. Yeah, the Dragon's Breath cannon routing. But they did manage to flatten a lot of Numenorians with that one shot. But it is only a final act of defiance, really. The Dragon's Wrath Crossbowmen will put on a pretty decent show as a last stand, I'm sure. But other than that, the Easterlings will be the first army in this fight to fall. Unfortunate for Rune, because I feel as though while he could have handled things better over here by choosing to trying to sort of spread himself out more, he should have, rather than just set up the 3 siege towers and just use them. But other than that, I don't think Rune did a great deal wrong. It was just the hand he was dealt. Over here, meanwhile, Trebor is now moving forward. The rest of his army is still a long way off, though, to be honest with you. And also, now with the runic player gone, the cavalry of Gondor only has a single target to go after, and it is Trebor's Mordor army. And he is sort of creeping forwards now. Is he going to be successful? We shall see. Orc fodder. Going to try and occupy the walls. Let's see over here. Another siege tower. Like, this is not going to make matters any easier. They're going to try and sort of push through. Almost like 2 train carts, sort of phasing through one another. Yeah, that was a Citadel guardsman that just got grilled, I think. Or an officer for one of the units. They are going to try and push through here, to be fair, the Nurad footman. Like, it's kind of succeeding, but I don't really see what they're going to gain from this. They're just going to be slaughtered as they do. Look at the amount of Gondorian soldiers ready to just rip them to pieces as they move on through. Not a lot left of that particular unit. Although I say that, it's actually a very long and thin unit, so maybe. I mean, it's just making life more cluttered over here, which doesn't really help the attackers at all. Meanwhile, the final stand of Rune The Dragon's Wrath Crossmen doing their thing, but if they were hoping that their stats as an elite unit would be able to net them a few kills on lowlier forces, they are sadly mistaken, because Numenor have committed their Pharism Swordmasters to see Rune off. At the very least, they're going to perish at the hands of very worthy opponents here, the Dragon's Wrath Crossbowmen, as the fight continues. Iron Royal Guard also nothing to be sneezed at, really. They're not multiple HP, but they're still very strong. I think actually as well, looking closer, some Vanguard of King Elisar also, so all of the heavy swordsmen are coming out to play here. And of course this just means that the Mark of the Knight and his runic army are soon going to be naught but a memory. We are sort of approaching the halfway point of this battle in terms of frames, and certainly I think the defenders can afford to be fairly pleased with their performance so far. Rune has been sort of the only attacker that I would say has been as proactive and has made decisions that I would mostly agree with, even if the execution wasn't all there. Whereas the other attackers so far haven't really offered enough for me. Mordor, well, there goes the runic general. Slain by a swordmaster. Now Mordor at least now are starting to put some pressure on, but it's as Rune die, you know, if this was at the same time that Rune were moving in, it might be a different matter. Orc javelins, they're on the walls, and they are throwing their javelins into the Iron Sentinels, but I mean, they should do a decent amount of damage here actually, but the real question is how long will they have this Orc fodder in front of them to take the hits for them? My guess is not all that long. Like, it may be a pike unit they're fighting, but the Orc fodder is so poor that it shouldn't be too difficult a task to see them off, if I'm being honest. Let's see what's going on down here. Not an awful lot so far. Still no Mordor presence in the gates on the streets of Osgiliath. Across comes the cavalry now, spreading their wings a little bit. 15 in one unit, 15 in the other. Some Orc fodder that are routing off. I mean, there are gaps that can be exploited now by the Gondorian cavalry on Trebor's army, and if they can do that, then his army will be in tatters before he ever really makes a move, which will be unfortunate for him. Some Citadel Guard moving up onto the walls as well to help matters, try and just get these Orc fodder out of the way as quickly as possible, and they do end up routing, so this of course is going to mean that those Orc javelins in behind them will be easy pickings. And they're even worse than the fodder in melee. The fact that they have a decent ranged attack is one thing, but they are going to be horribly exposed here. Another volley coming in. Do manage to get one again, much like the Dragon's Breath Cannon, one last act of defiance before the Citadel Guard inevitably tear them to pieces in melee. In come the Black Guard of Barad-dûr, pushing in. They're going to need more than just a single unit though, and I think Trebor is going to be one of those players that makes the unfortunate mistake of just sending forward individual units one at a time, and ends up getting his entire army killed for it. No, actually, looking like he is going to pour in. I mean, at this point, when you're in a situation like this, I genuinely think the best thing to do, if you've got yourself into it, just throw everything in. Force your opponent to commit everything they have to stopping you. You may lose, but at the very least you've taken a chunk out of your opponent, which the forces that are trying to cross the river in the middle are going to need that kind of damage inflicted on the defenders back here. Otherwise they're just going to be bottled up from now until the end of the battle. Trolls are moving in, having taken their damage already. In comes the cavalry. No, they're not going to charge into that unit there. They are going to charge into them. Well, I don't know if they were actually charging in then. I mean, I saw their lances for a split second, and there are some dead spearmen on the floor, so I guess they must have. But the Minas Morgul chosen, yeah, like, you know, that's the worst target they could have chosen to charge into out here, to be honest with you. They're taking hits from the Temple Guard as well, so decisive action is needed from the cavalry here before they get picked apart. One unit of cavalry already routed and destroyed. Are they going to try and go after the Temple Executioners? Again, another volley. Another 2 cavalrymen fall. A counter charge from the Temple Executioners, and I think with their melee defense, to be honest with you, a few of them do fall, but it's not as devastating as it would be. Multiple HP, high melee defense, they can somewhat dodge a charge as well as absorb it with those sorts of stats. I mean, they don't want to lose their HP like that really, but it could be worse for Mordor is the point I'm trying to make. There's some Orc javelins that are exposed as well. Mordor, meanwhile, at least, you know, Trebor, to give him his credit, he is now making something happen. But much like the runic player, I think the situation is very much against him. I'm not really sure if he's going to be able to achieve all that much here. Indeed. Guards of Osgiliath fighting against trolls, not really where they want to be, but between all the support they're getting, I'm sure they'll be fine. And Mordor, they really don't have the reinforcements out here to sustain this. Like, they need like the Nazgul on the front line here or something. Like, Trebor is definitely making the mistake that several players make. All 4 of their most elite infantry units outside of trolls are over here, twiddling their thumbs, doing nothing. Their main body of their army is getting torn to shreds. These elite units are going to do you no good at all if they're the only thing you've got left. They've got some Minismal chosen out there, but that's about it. So again, I think poor decision making from that particular Mordor player, and that may continue to cost them. That siege tower has now been pushed forward, which is giving them a little bit more room, but still no real progress being made from the attackers so far. Javelins being thrown, arrows now being trained on the infantry, which is having an effect, I think. The Nurad footmen are trying to make something happen as well. Their armor-piercing attacks will certainly be useful on the front line. Will it be what they need? Pelagia Marines. It's a lot of javelins that have been thrown into the front of that particular siege tower. And they actually do rout pretty quickly. And I mean, at least now, it is looking like the attacks are making some headway. This Gondorian front line may finally falter. But at what cost? Because clearly the attackers have lost an awful lot just to get to this point. And again, like the Citadel Guard on the way, there's a unit maximum of the Sarnak, so Gondor haven't completely given up on this front line yet. But if I were Gondor, actually, I wouldn't send in reinforcements. This front line has been as effective as I think it can be. It's falling apart now because all the basic sort of run-of-the-mill units are now starting to rout. Javelins are here. So I think this is a bit of a mistake from MSQ2, this. Like, know when you're beaten and move back to a better position to hold. Sending forward these 2 units is just going to get them killed and not... it's not going to be efficient for you. Keep harping on about efficiency in these battles, but it is... Total War is about just having as efficient as an engagement as you can, really. It's a management game at the end of the day. And so many people manage their resources very, very poorly. I wouldn't say anyone's done it too badly in this battle, but I definitely think there's room for a lot of improvement from an attacking perspective. It's just fortunate for attackers that they have a lot more margin for error than defenders. Over here, Nurad footmen pushing through. I would assume the Athelian Rangers, they've been here for long enough, they've probably used up most, if not all, of their ammunition. So it's certainly not the end of the world they're being caught now, but Nurad footmen maybe overextending themselves as well. That's more units coming out from MSQ2. Nimlothian Honor Guard as well. So I mean, MSQ2 really wants the engagement to remain outside of Osgiliath's walls, try and keep the city itself pure, but I think it's a fool's errand to do that. The attackers, though, seeing MSQ2, at the very least, what MSQ2 is doing here, he's forcing the attackers to commit more resources forward, and I don't think they were actually ready to do that, because they're only just mobilising now. Umbar getting some Balakith shield bearers ready to cross the river, and in the end, this attack could fall apart. The Nurad footmen are breaking. A lot of them are breaking, and they could be forced back to the bridge here, and the Gondorian front line could be re-established over here, especially. Support of the marksmen of Karandros shooting in over here, hitting the attackers as they cross the bridge. Could it be? Balagar archers are also here. Nurad halberds defeat seems certain.
Only half our force remains.
Balakith shield bearers trudging forward as well. Moran on halberds and Blackguard of Barad-dûr. So Mordor committing forward yet more resources. And they're going to need to, but they're slowly trudging their way across, and MSQ2 may have salvaged this situation. Again, eventually the attackers will break through here, but the longer that they're held up over here, in full view of yet more Gondorian archers, the rougher it's going to be for them, I think. Still a red triangle over here. Flagrim that are perpetually routing. Nardukadar that are just sort of hanging out in that siege tower. Their work is done. At least I'm sure they hope it is, but you can see over here, victory for the defenders. You know, there is death on both sides over here, but definitely, once again, an engagement that the defenders can afford to be quite pleased with when all is said and done. Ones of Minas Ithil Going to back up as well. Let's see here. Orc Javelins. Temple Executioners, Bulldogs. Like, yeah, they just don't have the numbers anymore, Mordor, to move in. I'm not sure whether Treble actually realises what's happening here, but the longer he just sort of hangs out, the more damage he's going to take from these arrow towers. So he's not safe by just standing here and refusing to commit. And to be honest with you, at this point, I would just send... Well, those are routing, but if I were him... I think he's just microing as many small good chosen, but if I were him, I'd just send up all of the units up both siege towers. Elite units, everything. Maybe send one unit down here, but like as soon as he moves in here, he's just going to be ripped apart. So I'd just send everything up on the walls. They could send an arch unit over here to sort of tilt that fight really heavily in favour of the defenders, but you need to do something. Like just sat here slowly dying is the last thing you want to happen. To be fair, those siege towers, the one thing they have done is block some of the trebuchet shots, I suppose, but that hasn't been a foolproof plan, because he has been able to do damage nonetheless. That was just on Orc Archers, but still. Orc Archers continuing to fire across the river. Still a very bloody fight. The reinforcements have arrived, but the Gondorian front line has been re-established. And now there's more range support coming in. The Pelagia Marines throwing their javelins into the front line. So once again, they're going to try and push through with their Great Shield unit here, Mordor. Try and use their Blackguard of Barad-dûr, but they're already shaken. And I think they'll rout before they actually see the desired effects. Gondor Archer's been committed to melee, so MSQ2, to be fair, I thought this was a mistake from him, but he has been able to take advantage of the fact that the attackers were not ready to reinforce their front line as quickly as they needed to, and the old Gondorian front line has once again been re-established. That's impressive. That more comes down to attacker error though. Like I would say in most situations what MSQ2 did there would just be... all it would do, I think, would be bad for the defenders in the long run. On this occasion, though, because of how the attackers were not ready to reinforce, I think they've done a good job there. Meanwhile, the shame on the name of this Mordor player here, as he is sent away from the gates, tail betwixt his legs, and it's about the only thing between his legs. Running away in such a manner. Shameful. Sauron will have a few choice words for him when he returns to the Black Tower. But this is the only fight that's happening so far, so just this singular choke point, and this is absolutely the sort of fight that will favour the defenders, as the heavily armoured legions of Gondor continue to hold on resolutely to this front line, and still not a lot of movement, and the attackers had their chance and again they blew it. They did not have the reinforcements, and now front line re-established, javelins firing into the side of this front line, doing some damage, and at this point it's only a few very scattered Balakith shield bearers and routing Morannon halberds that remain on this front line. And with Vanguard of King Elisar in there, with more elite units of Gondorians as well. I mean, at the very least the attackers are trying to affect this battle with their skirmishers. Veriag warriors marching across the bridge to lend their strength. I just dropped my pen on the floor. That'll never do, but I suppose I'll have to find that later on. I mean, when you consider how this fight has gone so far, how can the attackers turn this fight around? Well, it's difficult, because I feel as though the way that the attackers over on this side of the river had set themselves up, they had the ability to skirmish with the defenders. But unfortunately what they've done is they've moved in a lot of their infantry already and lost it. To be fair, that pen's bugging me, it's disappeared onto the floor somewhere. But to be fair, no, the Gondorians have taken losses, and perhaps they're hoping that eventually the Gondorian manpower will abandon them, as it can do when you're playing as the defenders in this sort of situation. But with range of fire, javelin fire, I wouldn't count on that. The losses that the attackers must have taken so far already must be fairly substantial. Orc javelins, orc archers moving forward, Veriag warriors retreating and routing before they ever reach the front lines. It's always a bad sign when you see that. And this may end up being one of those battles where it may be quite close in terms of the percentages, but it never really looks like the attackers are going to sort of stand any chance. And I don't know if Mordor hopes that if he can sort of shift his assault to another portion of the settlement whether that will work, but it's going to take so long. It's going to be so clear what he's planning that he's not really going to gain a great deal from doing that. Marksman of Caer moving a little bit closer. This is good for two reasons. One, of course, it means they have a better shot, but two, it also means they're ready to join the fight in melee when the time comes, and the Marksman of Caer is certainly a very effective melee combatant in their own right. Javelins coming in from the orcs. Well, that's one siege tower gone. 54% damage on that one as well. Lots of damage done to all of the various siege towers here, but none of it's going to be too significant in the end. I mean, those siege towers are in a position that at this point will help the attackers, but it doesn't seem to be helping them anywhere near enough. Like, they're still not truly gaining any ground. Forward comes some Brotherhood of the Axe. So, I mean, this is a sign, even though they're still in a situation here where the Gondorians are holding them at the bridge, they're getting shot, the sign that they're sending forward an elite unit that's unshielded, that would be very poor in this situation under arrow fire, says to me that they don't necessarily have the reserves that they need to actually see this through. I mean, I wouldn't have sent forward Brotherhood of the Axe in that situation. I probably would have been tempted to tell the Umbar player to get his arse in gear and send the Alcarondas Legion across first. Variag warriors are going to take another crack at things, but yeah, I mean, manpower is looking kind of poor. I mean, to be fair, if you look further into the settlement, there's still a few. I mean, mainly at this point back here, it's going to be Numenorians, because they obviously had a lot of reserves from when they fought Rune. Obviously, Gondorians are over there as well. I don't know. Can the attackers turn this around? Is it possible? It's possible, but I don't think they're going to do it. Especially not with those archers still in a good position. Like, that's the issue. Oh dear, oh dear. That's definitely going to be range of fire that's going into that blob there, which means we're going to have to position ourselves up here. Well then. It's definitely been a rough one so far, but I mean, you know, they need to hope that eventually MSQ2's position... Yeah, we can't zoom in on that. That's a disaster waiting to happen. Marksman. Romena Barwabarin. They're going to try and push their way through. I assume the rangers that are firing must be over in the town centre. Wild. Mordor once again are kind of move forwards, but I mean, I don't really know what they're hoping. I mean, they're going to move back and try and use the siege towers, I suppose. But normally I would be in favour of this. You know, more options up on the walls, but in this case I don't think it really gains Mordor anything. They don't have armies which are the size which this is going to make all that much of a difference to. They have rangers. So if they could maybe put the siege tower that the rangers are going in the middle, send units up either side of them to protect them, maybe shoot with their body-piercing projectiles, maybe then they have a hope of being somewhat efficient with this, but I think that ship has already sailed, to be honest with you. It was always going to be fairly tough on them when their trolls were sent in against lancers without any sort of support. The charging was always going to be... Oh, still. To be fair, there's armour-piercing arrows also now being sent in. Ones of Minas Ithil getting into position. It must have been them, I suppose. Sort of trying to shift to find an even better angle. Look at all these archers lining up to just tee off into this front line. This front line, it now says that victory seems certain for the attackers. How long that will last under the extreme pressure they're being put under, I do not know. Meanwhile, Minas Morgul chosen pushing up this siege tower. I mean, again, this is the issue. Like that, it's going to be so easy for the defenders to pivot at this point. If I were the defenders, I'd be quite tempted to try and finish Mordor off as quickly and as efficiently as I possibly could, to be honest with you. With Thrandir's retinue charging in, the Nazgul are going to come through the gates, but alone, without support, is when the Nazgul are at their weakest. So I don't really fancy their chances in there, if I'm being honest with you. Numenorians and Gondorians alike up on these walls, including ones of the White Tower, so there's no easy ride here for Mordor at all. What are they shooting at? They're shooting up into the air though, like the angle is just not going to be enough. Like, they're getting some decent hits on, but it's Boabrim as well. It's not even about him. It's not even line infantry. Poor decision making from start to finish from the attackers here, to be honest with you. Rune had glimmers of decent choices, but ultimately it's, well, to be fair, you know, here's a good example of a good choice. Nazgul are at least going to be supported with the Minas Morgul Chosen, who are going to punch right down the middle. The Gondorian player caught sleeping there, actually. Y2K not reacting anywhere near quickly enough. Although, actually, I thought Treble was actually going to go after the javelins, but in the end he was going after the one cavalryman. I take it back. That was a dreadful decision, because now he's turning his back to the Seafarers, and one volley from the Seafarers will devastate the Minas Morgul Chosen. Here we go. The fruits of his labour. And there we go. That's going to be enough to... I thought it would be enough to rout them, actually, but the Minas Morgul Chosen are a higher end unit, I suppose. In come the Bulldogs. The Nazgul are in melee as well. There goes the Khandish General. Things are still very laggy over there in that particular fight because of all the arrows. Marksman of Care Andros. Firing in Nurad Stormguard. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Which is wild when you think about it, but the things that they're having to throw into this fight at this point just to get that little tooltip to turn up must be extreme. In come some Corsair crossbows. It's a pretty decent unit to have in the back pocket for the late game, but I can't help but feel as though the die has been cast in this fight. Minas Morgul Chosen broken and fighting to the death. Nazgul supported by Bulldogs, and to be fair, in come the Minas Morgul Chosen now, so they are getting supported, the Nazgul. Mordor trying to make something happen, but failing, really. A lot of siege towers have been set up, but for no real purpose. It's this sort of an elaborate ruse to double back and then try and go, oh dear, those Minas Morgul Chosen routing immediately. Dunaim Shadowbows are going to be able to get up onto the walls. They might get a few decent volleys before all is said and done, but I kind of doubt it, because I mean the Seafarers have the ability to get up onto the walls very easily and just sort of stop them, but we shall see if they go unnoticed or not. There's still Temple Guard and Temple Executioners running around, but those two units alone are not going to be enough. I mean, to be fair, Mordor has made things a little bit more awkward to finish them off than Rune did, but their fates have been ultimately very... oh dear. It's been a while since I've had like one section of the battle be that laggy. At this point, I suppose it's just because it's been a mosh pit for so long. And the bodies have really started to pile up on one another as well. As well as, of course, the Ranger Fire being sent in over there. In that vicinity, anyway. There's still more arrows to be loosed as well. The attackers have been stuck on that one choke point for so long. And ultimately, if you're stuck on a choke point for that long, as the attackers, you have to take responsibility for it. You have the manpower to be able to wear the defenders down. You had the tools as well to try and counteract them, I think, but just didn't use them well enough. Over here, Ramena, Boabrim and Narunaru Sentinels getting into position, and they, of course, will be able to stop the Adunaim Shadowbows from continuing to fire as they have done. Let's see here. Axeman of Blasarnak charging in. Should be enough to add the final touches. Temple Executioners moving in, the Bulldogs. I mean, these are the most elite Mordor units, and with those continued volleys, like, there should be force pathing here, to be fair. The Numenor player, he shouldn't allow himself to get caught up on individual models when the main bulk of the unit is further back. Let's see here, Warns of Minnesithil once again moving into a different position. Ramena Boabrim taking some hits from Corsair Crossbowmen, actually. But they'll take that. You know, the Corsair Crossbowmen would be much better used at shooting into blobs of defensive infantry, so the fact that that isn't happening is a good thing for them. Veterans of OSGILIATH as well will be able to deal some impressive damage. Little docks over here. Still the Alcarondas Legion not being committed. Just sort of hanging out back here. One of them maybe now, as Umbar continues to roll forwards. Balakith Marksman waiting in reserve as well. Yep, that's the limit to what we can do before the frames vanish. Orc Archers, Veriag Bowmen, Corsair Crossmen, and once again, Says defeat still seems certain for the Gondorians. And this must be a result of MSQ's exuberance to try and defend that point for as long as possible, but his allies should have enough left in the tank that it's not going to affect them too much. Oof. Look at that frame rate in that mosh pit. So one of the enemy generals has fallen. Iron Arrow Sentinels, and there we go, the last of the Adunheim Shadowbows have been engaged now by the Boebrim. They may be archers, but they are good in melee, to be fair. Certainly more than a match for 20 isolated rangers. And with the Mordor player ultimately sending all those towers around only to use one of them. Temple Guard going to engage the Wards of the White Tower. Interesting fight, to be fair, but the Wards of the White Tower should probably have enough to deal with that, I would think, especially with the support of the tower. There's also 8 Belagar footmen that could be sent in. I'm sure they'll really appreciate being in melee with Temple Guard. Look at that over there. Like, I can't really get any closer to the fight than this, which is unfortunate, but Medieval 2 will be what it will be. Temple Executioners on the front line. Slowly but surely, the attackers are making some sort of gap, but they're going to have not much with which to try and take advantage of it. Over here, meanwhile, Remena Abarim, Narun Arur Guard, in reserve as the Numenorians and Gondorians continue to hack their way through what's left of Sauron's minions. Also, it's rather a moot point. The Temple Guard are going to try and get up here to shoot, but it doesn't matter. They're getting shanked by Wards of the White Tower. There's also Narun Arur Sentinels moving in to add their phalanx to the equation, and this unit of Remena is probably going to try and sandwich them as well. Very, very nicely done. The Numenor player is actually a player I don't recognise the name of, but he's clearly played some Medieval 2 before, because he's definitely more adept with the game. Like, there are certain things which brand new players will do which I haven't seen. Look at that frame rate. That is atrocious in there. It's been a while actually since I've seen that. Like, if there's been technical difficulties recently, it's just been straight up crashes. Well, I say recently, that was actually about over a month ago at this point where I was having those particular issues. But it's been rare actually that the frame rate has nosedived in quite that spectacular a fashion. But I can only assume it must be the dead bodies that have piled up to such an extent over there that things are starting to get a little bit dicey with regards to the amount of models on the field. Seafarers and Lindamos are up here. The Temple Guard continuing to try and fire in spite of the fact that they are getting stabbed literally in the back, hoping that their armour will do the job for them. A grand and intoxicating innocence. Temple Guard still trying to reload. Mordor trying to inflict as much damage as possible, but the rest of the Numenorians, I mean, you can see here Y2K sending over a couple of his remaining elite units. Y2K, I think, is probably the player with an army that's in the best shape. Him or Numenor. Certainly MSQ2 has sent forward so much of his stuff for the central thoroughfare across the river. Defeat is a distinct possibility. Temple Guard don't go down easy, do they? They've been thoroughly outmatched, and yet they're still standing. Temple Executioners even less so. Still 28 of them remaining, and if it's going to be spears and pikes that have been asked to kill them, it'll take a lot longer yet for Trebor to be destroyed once and for all. Interesting statue. A lot of my better thumbnails recently have been ones of statues, so maybe I'll use that guy as my thumbnail still. Yeah, it must be something to do with the environment rather than archers per se. I suppose it could be the arm-piercing arrows, but I kind of doubt it. Balakathak's Guard moving forward. There's still some reserves across the river from Umbar, but not enough at this point. Like I said, MSQ2 still has some forces on the front line putting up a fight. I mean, at this point the defenders could just send everything out there once all is said and done. There's a few Numenorians left in here, but other than that, the percentages, like I said, will probably paint a picture of a battle which is fairly close. When I say that, that's a fairly large differential, considering the kind of battle that it is. But having said that, the defenders have played this pretty much ideally. Haven't really noticed any major mistakes. And the attackers, there have been several. So perhaps this is justice. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Indeed. Fountain Guard moving in as well, so no rest for the weary. Y2K sending over some more reinforcements to make sure that the Mordor menace is contained. Still, it's said victory seems certain over here for quite a while at this point. But they're still in the same place that they were before. Balakath marksmen, Veriag bowmen and Corsair crossmen firing, but they're all wavering, so they must be taking hits from somewhere. Out come the Royal Legion. So yeah, I think the defenders are content to just sort of keep this one choke point. Why not? It's served them well, and you'll scarcely see a better choke point in the interior of the settlement, to be honest with you. So it's unfortunate we may not get to see that little fortification back there used in any meaningful way. Still some Naru Sentinels, still some Royal Guard, still a unit of Alcarondas Legion, but that's pretty much it. Pretty much it for Umbar. Over here, meanwhile, Mordor taking a long time over perishing, as you would expect from the kind of units they still have left, to be honest. I mean, there's 10 Temple Guard at this point, locked morale units, this kind of thing, so they will fight until the bitter end. Man. Still these 8 Balagar footmen, like with some other units throughout the battlefield, I think they just feel as though their work is done. Fancy a bit of a rest. Let their comrades handle the last of this. And why not? I think that's something I can get behind. There's something fighting over here, isn't there? No, they're just sort of shifting around themselves. Mordor, it does look as though finally they are going to be dealt with. There's only 8 Temple Executioners remaining. There's Raven Helms on the front line. There's more Romena units. I think that's Nimlothian Honor Guard as well. From Y2K. Yes, it is. So all of the very best units that they have left that they can muster, taking care of business. It's been an interesting fight to comment on, really, because I mean, you know, Mordor and Rune, like, their engagements have been kind of interesting. Like, they've always been losing them, but they have. But mainly, the fight to Epicenter has truly, in fact, been over here. But yet, it's been a choke point fight where the attackers have charged across the bridge, and Gondor have not budged. They have stood and fought, and now they're receiving support from Royal Legion. You know, what's left of the Numenor players' army is now being sent in, and I don't think they're going to be able to get across here. I genuinely don't. Some Fountain Guard over here, which were... yeah, you can see now they're starting to filter across, like Mordor are beaten. They know it, so they're going to get ready to move across. Nazgul. It says something about how strong the Nazgul truly are at withstanding punishment. That they were one of the first ones in, and yet they're still standing, in spite of the overwhelming odds that they've been faced with. Truly a unit to be admired. Let's see here. Nothing up there. Nothing left for Mordor at this point. Again, I'm sort of lingering on this fight maybe longer than I otherwise would, because I know that my fate for the rest of this fight is looking from afar on a single choke point fight, which the defenders will inevitably have enough to hold on and win. Whereas this one, or these 2 Nazgul that remain, I think there are. The only reason this guy's still alive, I think, is because he's surrounded by seafarers, which, and the other one is as well, actually. As soon as units like the Romena start to get involved, or the Nimlothian Honor Guard, they should fall away. The Seafarers are good makeshift infantry, but it takes a little bit more than makeshift infantry to be good enough to tangle with Nazgul in a duel. Still the towers. I wonder how many kills the towers have truly got throughout this fight. I'm guessing quite a few. Because I think, you know, they have been loitering. Mordor, especially over here, was loitering in their reach for maybe a little bit too long. This one over here is now surrounded by the hardier Romena Abarim, so you'd imagine he's not going to last too much longer. Meanwhile, Still some ammunition from Lord Blackhole to be used, as well as the Orc Archers. Oh my god. Yeah, it's really bad over there now. Victory is a distinct possibility. For the defenders, of course, I think at this point it's very clear to all that the defenders are going to be victorious here. The attackers could have turned it around at several points in this battle, but in the end, it just wasn't to be. Still these Nazgul are over here, still clinging to life. Get something a little bit better in there, get the Wardens of the White Tower or the Nimnothian Honor Guard in there to try and deal with them. These basic run-of-the-mill units, even by Numenor's standards, are not going to get this done anytime soon, I don't think. The whiz of an arrow there. Don't know what that was all about. That was the tower, of course. Going stir crazy, I swear. They're actually fighting... Oh, that one just died. They fought their way sort of near to one another and then one of them perished. This is surely going to be the end of him as well. He is going to be able to get another kill before he inevitably falls. How much longer can he last? Again, like I said, I'm only really focusing on this one dude because as soon as we have to go over there, we're going to have to watch from afar. He's going to be able to get another kill in exactly the same manner as he managed to get before. He's going to try and leave, although if he does that, maybe he hopes that he can just leave one unit of elites over here and the rest of his units can just sort of head off, which is probably the better way to do things, which now, with Wardens of the White Tower fighting him, he's going to have no easy kills to get. And they should be sufficient to finish off this one Ringwraith. A few Royal Guardsmen in there as well, albeit with their Spear Malice, they're probably not going to be what's called for in this particular situation. My man's just given up. He's just letting it happen. Letting himself get stabbed over and over. There he goes. And there we have the tanky Nazgul doing what they do best. But from now, we now have to watch this fight from afar because the frames are so bad. So, we shall move up. To be honest, I think times 6 speed is probably the best choice here because it's easily go, well, I mean, maybe they lose. Maybe they do lose this fight. But I kind of doubt it because there's reinforcements on the way, and based on the amount of frames that are left, I can only imagine the defenders are just going to pour everything onto this bridge. So, you know, MSQ2, I thought that it was a mistake to try and salvage that first choke point, and it would have been had the attackers been sort of on hand with more reinforcements to consolidate their gains. They did get through at one point, but MSQ2 pushed them back. And the attackers' fate was probably sealed from that moment onwards, to be honest with you. They never made it past this choke point over here, which is a shameful performance, really, from the attackers over here. You need to push the defenders back at least one defensive position. As it was, though, they never even got to the gates. And really, you know, it was only the Runic player that managed to set foot into the interior of OSGILIATH with any sort of numbers. The cannons themselves made it further than any of the infantry units from the armies over on that side of the river. So I may have been probably most harsh on Trebel of all the players. But to be honest with you, at the very least, he made it into the settlement to a certain extent. The attackers over here, like, yes, it's one choke point, it's difficult, but you've got to be prepared to be able to sort of recognise when the line falters and then you push in. That's the key. That's the secret to success. And it's the secret to success that the attackers on this occasion never really looked like breaking. I mean, there's not a huge amount of forces left over there when you consider it. So again, like on paper, it is a closer battle than it ended up being. Like, you know, I can't see now. Yeah, there it is. Well, 20%. I mean, 20% isn't all that close, to be honest with you. But yeah, very well deserved from the defenders. Like, the defenders were the better players throughout. There were several mistakes made by, to be frank, all of the attacking players. I think Rune is probably the attacking player which gets away most with this. Not only because they got the most kills, but because they seemed to have more of a plan. You know, they weren't content like, you know, the first Mordor army in Trebel to try and wait for something to happen, which based on his composition and position on the field he kind of had to, but you have to take those things into account when you pick your army. And to be honest with you, going for a full quality Mordor army is not something I do on the attack. very often, because that sort of thing can happen to you, you're easier to box up, and that's exactly what the defenders want. Because even if you go full quality, a defending army in this situation, with the amount of money they must have had as an advantage, are always going to be able to make their quality tell against yours. The Numenor player, he may not have got as many kills, but I think he deserves a lot of credit. I mean, a newer player, and he did most. I'm assuming a newer player anyway, unless it's a name change or just a player that hasn't played Reforged, but plenty of Medieval too. He did very well, did everything he needed to, dealt with Rune, supported against Mordor on the other side, and finally was the killing blow on the attacks in the middle. As for the attackers, I mean, I think I've said everything that needs to be said. Over here, MSQ2 getting the most kills by far, and I think it's the Rangers that did that. I mean, if you look, Athelian Rangers doing very well, most of the archers getting a good amount of kills, Fountain Guard forming the basis of his front line as well, Trebuchet getting over 400 kills, that's a very good performance from them. Wands of Minas Ithil getting 231, Y2K probably a similar story, Mithrandir's retinue getting 173. Yeah, I mean, again, archers for Gondor are definitely one of the faction's strengths, because they have such a wide variety of them. And in particular here, when you're bottled up like they were, Rangers are always going to be a massive problem. But even just their higher end archers, because of their base damage, they may not have body piercing or armour piercing. But stuff like the Marksman of Caer Andros and Veterans OSGILIATH can still deal a lot of damage when they have a clear path to a target with all of their ammunition, as they had here, which I think is reflected in the kills that MSQ2 was able to get. And just looking at the numbers from the attacking armies as well, Rune, Umbar and Trebor's Mordor army, not enough numbers for me. Not enough. Like, if you're going to go for this sort of thing, you need numbers more than they had, I think. I think it's more understandable with Rune and Umbar. Even then, though, like with Rune and with Trebor's army on the outside, I would have gone more numbers heavy. Like, when you're playing on OSGILIATH as the attacker, there's always the possibility that you're going to be over on this side, and you have the ability to spread your wings a little bit more and try and get into the settlement through multiple routes. Whereas that is the thing that the three armies on the other side of the river had against them. Like, they had one path, basically. And it was always going to be rough for them, and I do have some sympathy there. Like, to be stopped at one choke point and never make any progress is kind of shameful, but it's something they'll learn from, I'm sure. Yeah, a question of composition as well, really, to be honest with you. Composition was always in question here, I think, for the attackers, whereas the defenders, defending compositions in this sort of situation, to be honest, is easy. Like, all you really need to do is load up on your most quality infantry and archers, maybe mix in some cavalry if you're feeling adventurous. So I can't really give the defenders any sort of credit for composition. It was always going to pick itself, really, with regards to Gondor and Numenor. Yeah, big thank you to MSQ2 for sending this one to me. It took a little while to get to, but I got there in the end, and I felt as though, for a 2 million view milestone, it made sense to do a larger scale siege, even if it was, a relatively cut and dry one in the end. But next, I don't really want to go into too much detail about what's next. I mean, to be fair, based on the time of the week that it is, it probably will be another Reforged battle, to be honest with you. But moving forwards, there are a few things that need to be addressed, but I can't really do that here at the end of such a long battle, because people at this point are probably already checked out. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.